Welcome to the Speechie Show. Being a speech-language pathologist often means having too much work and not enough planning time. To beat the overwhelm, we're bringing you the tricks and tools that will make your job a little bit easier. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Speechie Show. I am your host, Carrie Clark from speechandlanguagekids.com. And I am here today with Rose Griffin from ABA Speech with Rose. And we are chatting today about children with autism and severe complex communication disorders. We're going to talk about how to make your therapy more systematic. So welcome to the show, Rose.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're excited to be here today. I just got finished watching a total solar eclipse, which was insane. So if you are on here with us live, I want to know if anyone else saw it today. So let us know. Type in the comments if you actually saw any part of the solar eclipse today. Rose, you said you were watching it on TV, right? You didn't actually get to see any of it?
Yeah, no. Here in Ohio, it was just another little gray day. But yeah, we saw it on TV and it looked awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. My 3-year-old definitely freaked out when it got really dark because it got like as dark as night here. Like we could see the stars. It was insane. And he was like, I'm going inside. He was all done. All right. So we're here today to talk about autism and complex communication disorders. We're going to make your therapy a lot more systematic, a lot more easy to know feel like you know what you're doing. So if you're new to the show, I am Carrie Clark. I am from speechandlanguagekids.com. And this is the Speechie Show. We do this once a week. We hop on with a new speech-language pathologist from a different company. We share some tips, we share some resources, and we're going to do some giveaways here in a couple minutes. So stay tuned if you're joining us on Facebook Live today. And Rose, why don't you go ahead and start off with some introductions, and then we'll get into our 5 tips.
Sure. My name is Rose Griffin. Like she said, I am a speech-language pathologist and a board-certified behavior analyst. And so I work with all different types of students in the positions that I work in. I work 3 days a week in a public school, middle school, high school, and then I work 1 day a week in a clinic that is devoted to working with students with autism. And so that's really the area that I specialize in, is helping speech therapists feel more comfortable providing functional and systematic therapy for students who have autism and anybody who is really struggling to find their voice and develop a functional response form.
Perfect. So one thing I kind of wanted to bring up at this point in the interview is I feel like there are often 2 camps of there's the speech language pathologist and there's the ABA therapist, and they seem to be butting heads. So you've kind of brought those 2 together. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the 2 and why we don't need to fight?
Right. Yes. Well, I did a blog post for ASHA in May about how speech therapists and BCBAs can work together collaboratively. And I think it's just hard because we learn different things in graduate school. And sometimes the things that we're working on together with a client are not mutually exclusive, that they could be the same types of things. And speech therapists and board-certified behavior analysts may be coming at those things differently. And so sometimes I think speech-language pathologists we're doing a lot of the things that we're talking about in the behavioral world, but maybe we're calling them something different. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's, from both camps, is that I wish BCBAs would learn a little bit more about the broad scope of practice that us speech therapists have. And I wish that speech therapists would understand that BCBAs really are here to help, and can really, when we work together collaboratively, we can just help students with these complex needs really just make such great progress, and get their lives back and be able to communicate with the world. And it can be so very exciting. Yes. But it's a process, and that's really what I've been passionate about, trying to get, the 2 sides to kind of talk together, because there aren't too many people who are duly certified. So yes.
Honestly, I feel like a lot of times it becomes this fear of the unknown. Like, I don't really understand what you ABA therapists are doing, right, and it doesn't seem right to me, whereas we're doing the same stuff, we're just calling it different things, like you said.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. So just kind of getting on a level playing field and knowing what all the different acronyms mean that are related to behavior analysis, which we'll talk about some of those, today too.
Perfect. All right, if you are joining us on Facebook Live, we are going to be doing some giveaways, so stay tuned. And we would love to see where you're from. So type in the comments where you're from and if you saw an eclipse today, because I did and it was awesome. All right, we're going to move in while we're waiting on those comments to come through. We're going to move into our 5 tips for making your language intervention a little more systematic when you're working with these children with more complex needs. So the first thing we're going to talk about is that assessment piece of it. So let's talk about what assessment looks like for this and how we can kind of make this a really helpful tool in the process and not this overwhelming, scary, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Sure, yeah. And I think the assessment can be the hardest part because a lot of the times the assessments that we've learned about in graduate school and that are standardized don't really capture what we need to really work on for these types of students. So learning readiness skills, can the student imitate? Is the student requesting? Sometimes those are not really captured on some of the tests that we give. So what I really like to use in this assessment called the VB map, which I have it right here, the VB map. It was created by Dr. Mark Sundberg, who's a PhD and a BCBA D, and also Barbara Esch, who's a PhD and a speech therapist and a BCBA. So she did the ECOIC assessment. And so that really looks at, can the student request? Can the student follow directions? What are their imitation skills like? Can they match identical objects or pictures? How are they in a group? And then it's leveled from 0 to 48 months. So there's 3 different levels. And it gives you a really good idea of where is the student right now with all those different skills. And then how can we set up a program that is going to touch on all those skills? ECOIC skills, that's another really big one. And so I use that for students who are early learners. And when I say early learners, I don't necessarily mean students who are younger. It could be a student who's older, middle school, and for whatever reason hasn't been able to develop a way to communicate. And so I love that assessment, and it's one that I use, and it's one that the team, we've been talking about having a team approach, so an intervention specialist can help out with it. There's good information of BCBA if you have one involved. A paraprofessional can help out, kind of guiding some of the instruction, gathering data on the different points. And so it's really comprehensive, and that's my favorite one to use. I also use the communication matrix, which I know that some speech therapists are probably more familiar with, and that's an online assessment that is free. I like to use that too.
Yeah, we talked about that one, I think, 2 weeks ago, maybe on the Speechie Show. You can look back and see, because we actually went through and kind of talked about what that is and how it works, and that's a great tool as well, for sure.
That's great, yeah. And if anybody's interested, there were a lot of people on the ASHA SIG 16 group for the school-based issues that were interested in learning more about the VB map because they were going to be doing it in their placements. And so last year I did a free Zoom session about that. So if you go to my website, www.abaspeech.org, I have a free webinar just about kind of introducing the tool a little bit more detailed.
Awesome. When we get done, will you put that in the comments of the Facebook post so that people can see that?
Definitely.
Perfect. All right, cool. All right, we got a couple people chiming in here. So Leah Curtin says she is in Denver, Colorado, saw the eclipse. Statesville, North Carolina, took a client outside during the eclipse so she could experience it as well. That's awesome. And Blake's from Clayton, North Carolina, had a partial eclipse here. Kind of disappointed. Oh, it was definitely cool to see the full thing. We had a partial when I was a kid, and it wasn't the same.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool.
All right, so if you're just joining us, we are talking today about working with our children with autism and those severe complex communication disorders. We're going to kind of help you make your therapy more systematic. We just talked about assessment. So we're going to move now into actually making those services more systematic. So let's talk about some collaboration. How do we kind of get to the meat of this here?
Yeah, I think what's very most important is starting with that assessment piece. And then once you have the assessment, is working together collaboratively as a team. I think there are so many, because I work in a clinic and I work in a public school, and so each place has their pros and cons and their barriers. And I think that making sure you know who's on the team, and I think that's another thing that can be really intimidating for people, and me included, is that oftentimes when you're working with students with complex communication needs, when you go to an IEP meeting, there may be, 15 people around the table, and it's hard to understand, who is everybody, what is our role, how can we work together collaboratively. And so what I try to do, Carrie, is I just really try to build rapport, first of all, with the student. And sometimes in the behavioral world, we may call that pairing. We're pairing ourselves with reinforcement And we just, as speech therapists, call that building rapport. Like we just talk with the student. I'm not trying to put a whole lot of demands on the kiddo. I'm just trying to find out, what do you enjoy doing? And I'm not going to make you label a bunch of stuff at first or request anything. I just want to know that when you come to speech or when I'm in your classroom, that I'm here to have fun and I am the giver of all these awesome toys or whatever it is that you're into. And I think that's so important, is making sure that each member on the team feels that they can contribute and that we all have a place on the team. I think that's the very most important thing. And I think, too, a lot of the times these students are going to have paraprofessionals or assistants that are going to be working with them. And so if you're able to have that paraprofessional or the teacher, whatever the setup is where you're working, sit in with you while you're working with the student for a duration of time, that really helps us build a rapport with the staff. It helps us show them and model that this is how you work on these different goals, and making sure that everybody knows what the goals are. So that's something where I work that I try to get put in place, is having a shared data sheet. So knowing, let's say we have a student that's working on answering personal information questions, I would have a data sheet, and it would say what the IEP objective is and exactly what the target is. So, what is your name or when is your birthday? And so that all staff understands that's what the target is, and then they've watched me in therapy so that they feel comfortable when I'm not present, that they can work on those different types of things when I'm not there.
Absolutely. I think that's huge in working with, creating these systems and creating a systematic approach, is bringing in the people that are going to spend the most time with that student, because generally we don't have the most time with that student, nor should we, because we're often not part of the natural setting. Usually they're in a classroom and we want them to generalize the skills they learn with us to that natural setting. And if no one else is working on it in the natural setting, that's not going to happen.
Right. And that's what's been and that's why I feel so passionately about, coming on your show and just all the different things I've been doing, is that, I have worked with kiddos who have had no way to communicate, were, about 8, 9, or 10 years old. And we had a systematic approach of using the VB map, starting to work on requesting, which we're going to talk about, and getting everybody on the same page so that we all were doing these things every day. We need to ask ourselves, what are we doing to make our services more systematic? I had a student that came to me at about 8 years old, and he wasn't requesting, didn't seem to like any of the toys or anything that I offered him, didn't want to engage with the iPad, which, that's never happened. Really had me, was really challenging. And so, I just had to, get out there and search, and I did a preference assessment, which you can Google, and that just gives you different ideas of what a student might be into. We found out this student, and if you've ever watched any, I have some webinars on speechpathology.com. I have videos of this student. And we started with requesting food using pictures because he was really limited in what he liked. And we segued that into music, and now different leisure skills like playing Fruit Ninja, watching Go Noodle. And so we really started with the assessment, getting the team together. And now the student is able to use his device. He's able to use it at home. He goes on vacation. And it's just really, it is broadened his world, and it has broadened his family's world as well.
So awesome.
It's really powerful when you do it.
Yeah, that's so awesome. All right, if you're watching on Facebook Live, comment in if you've ever had a student that you don't think responds to anything. I get this question all the time where it's like, what do I do if he really is not interested in anything? Which I'm not saying like you're making it up. I'm saying like legitimately some of our children have no interest until we start doing more of this probing, kind of trying to figure out what they're into. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's really hard. I worked down in Austin, Texas at Leander ISD, and that was one of the really cool things I could do as an autism facilitator. We had some grant monies, and we purchased manding kits for the speech therapists on staff. And so if they had a new student who they didn't know what they liked, or they wanted to kind of build a rapport and pair with them, they would check out this manding kit. And basically, I got to go to Target and buy toys, and it was amazing, and assemble all these kits. So that was an awesome day at work, to say the least.
Yes. I love the reinforcer probe when you bring out all of your goodies, the things that always get somebody, and you just kind of rotate through them and see what they'll actually interact for sure.
Exactly.
All right, so we've talked about doing an assessment. We've talked about getting the team involved. Next, we're going to talk about getting a student requesting. Although before we do that, sorry, we're going to pause. We do have somebody saying, where can I find the videos of the child she was talking about? That was on speechpathology.com, right?
Yeah, so on speechpathology.com, I have about 4 webinars on there right now, and then I'm doing another one in November. And so I always like to, if you just get on there and you look up my name, you can see them. I have about 4 or 5 on there. I'll be doing one in November that's going to be talking about a student that theoretically is already requesting, and then what do we do after that student does have a way to request wants and needs. So we'll be talking about kind of what we're talking about today, like real in depth. And I'll have, my clients have been so great to say that I could show videos of their students. And so I'll be showing videos in therapy to demonstrate some of these skills I'm talking about today.
Perfect. So that's just go on and look for Rose Griffin on speechpathology.com. Perfect. Okay, so let's talk about requesting. This seems to be this is where we start. This is the most basic kind of communication that is the easiest to kind of get your foot in the door. So let's talk about how this looks for a systematic approach.
Yeah, so requesting, I have 3 kids of my own. I know a lot of us as therapists have children's family-friendly profession. So I was just on vacation with my kiddos, and I have a 2-year-old. So when you're with kiddos who are developing language, typically you really realize how much they request. And that's really where it starts. So not to say that other things aren't important, but when I'm working with an early learner, that's really what I want them to understand is, I do something, I get something, I do something, I get something. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what we're building in their learning repertoire. So they understand, like, hey, learning, I can do this, I can request. And so what we want to do, and, we as a team and with the student, we need to decide, is the student going to be requesting verbally? Are they going to be requesting with AAC? Are they going to be using sign language? So I have a student that I was working with at a team, collaboratively with a team, and we tried a device at first because the student was nonverbal, and the student didn't have a really good point, so they weren't able to hold long enough to activate the buttons. So then after a while, the students started verbalizing. We were working on verbal imitation. And so we said, why don't we do sign language? And so now the student, with all this systematic instruction in place, is able to request using sign language and also verbalizations. So really making it powerful, making sure everybody's on the same page, making sure we understand what the student enjoys. And if a student looks like they want something like a ball or iPad, but then you have them request it and you give it to them and that's not what they want, not making them engage with it at that moment.
Play with the ball.
Yeah, it's okay to change your mind. Just like I always say, the coffee examples, like yesterday I got Dunkin', today I went to Starbucks. It's like you have to ask your students, what are you into today? So in the behavioral world, we call that MO. What's your motivation? What are you motivated by today? And always checking in with your learner or your student at the start of every session, because what they liked yesterday, maybe they had the iPad all day at home last night, so they're not into that anymore. So we need to always be checking in, deciding how we're going to work on requesting, choosing about 3 to 5 mands to begin with, a request. That's the word that B.F. Skinner, he wrote a book called Verbal Behavior, talked about different verbal operants, and we did learn about that in graduate school. I did check back in my language book. It was one of the...
Skimmed over it.
Yes, we skimmed, but it was there. I was like, oh, okay. And so that's so important. I think another thing that's so important is making sure that we're being a giver, not a taker. So if we have a student that asks for juice, we don't give them the whole juice box. That maybe we have a cup and we put some juice in, give the student the juice, they drink the juice, natural consequences, they might be motivated for more juice, so they ask for more. What happens is, and this would happen to me too, and this is, one of the reasons I was driven to learn more about autism, is I would work with students with challenging behavior, and I felt like I wasn't being very effective because I wasn't able to analyze what was going on in the session the way that I can now with all the professional development I've done, but understanding that instead of taking something away, because we may be thinking, oh, I want to work on requesting or I want to do something different, is that I call it a rotating array of reinforcement. So, okay, we did the juice, and then maybe I have a puzzle. Okay, he does the puzzle. I don't want to take the puzzle away. I don't want to say, okay, puzzle, all done. I want to bring out something like bubbles or a book or whatever, if you have an older learner, things that are age appropriate. And so I kind of call that my rotating array of reinforcement. So we're getting requests, we're working on communication, IEP objectives, we're taking data because we know we need to do that, but we're not taking things away. So those would be my key things to working on requesting.
I love that. I love the idea of not taking away, because I feel like so many times that's what we kind of are expected to do, is like, okay, give them that and let them play for 5 seconds and then my turn, and you take it back, and then you create this meltdown and you're like, well, that was useless.
Right. And then the whole session is trying to recover.
Yes. Yeah. I like that, of just bringing out the next thing that they're going to be motivated to request for. Perfect. Yeah. Okay, if you guys have any questions as we're going along, please type those into Facebook Live comments, and we will answer those as we go along. And we're also going to do some giveaways here in just a couple minutes. So if you are watching with us live, stay tuned. But we're going to move on from requesting to labeling. So first of all, do you feel like this is the next step, or is this something you kind of introduce alongside requesting?
Yeah, I think they all go together. Mm-hmm. You know, I think sometimes for students, I had a student who had very aggressive behavior, was a major behavioral barrier, had no way to communicate, and I was working with him at a private school. He's also in some of those webinars I've done. And with that particular student, we just worked on requesting and using a device, and we worked on receptive language. But that was a special case. So I'd say for most students, and that student, by the way, is doing great, able to go to Dairy Queen, able to request things, get fries, sit in a public place, you know, hooray. So that was very specific, very individualized. But for most students, I would say these things all kind of come together. And so, you know, when you're working on labeling, that's one of the points I wanted to touch on. And more, I feel like I had learned a little bit more in my behavioral training, is making sure that when we're working on labeling either actions or nouns, that we're working on showing students different examples. So multiple exemplar training is what we talk about. And so in speech pathology, we talk about that. We want to make sure that a student can generalize. It's like, gone are the days when we go to get a student, when we march them down to the speech room and we do magical things and bring them back. And, you know, that might work for some minor little things, but, you know, the kind of students that I'm working with, and I think a lot of the students, you know, with the prevalence rate being 1 in 68 for students with autism, is that I read a journal article that said 90% of school-based SLPs are working with students with autism. So I think that even just in the 14 years I've been doing this, you know, the severity level seems to be more, you know, intense in the school setting. And so I think sometimes it's hard to know what to work on first, because it just seems like everything needs to be addressed. And so with labeling, just making sure that we're using multiple examples. So I created a product called the Action Builder Cards, but I created it, Carrie, because there weren't any materials I was finding out on the marketplace that I was able to use to teach language the way that I wanted to systematically. So for example, if we had a student that was working on labeling washing, that we would want to show, you know, this is washing with washing hands, and that this is also washing with washing dishes, which is a great picture if you have older learners working on vocational things. But then washing can also mean washing hair. And so I wanted students, because what happens sometimes is we may just show, and I'm guilty of this too, we may just show a student one picture of washing. And then when they see a student out in the natural environment and maybe somebody wants to facilitate language instruction out there where it's happening, the student doesn't get it, we're confused on why that didn't happen. And so, you know, whether you have these cards or not, you want to make sure that you're planning for generalization so that students understand, okay, washing can mean washing hands, it can mean washing hair, and we're building a bridge from what happens in therapy to what happens out in the natural environment.
I love that. I love it. So first of all, if you are watching on Facebook Live with us, comment in, are you working with students with autism or not? You were saying 90% in the stats are saying that they work with children with autism. So I want to see what our listeners are saying. So type in if you are or not working with children with autism. But the other point I wanted to bring up was I have listened to Temple Grandin talk. Have you ever listened to her?
Yes, I've seen her talk. Yeah.
I love her as a speaker. But one of the things she said that really got to me was, she said, okay, so when we think of, you hear the word dog, at least for me, I have a picture of a golden retriever in my head, and that is like my generic dog, like placement, that like that's just what I think of when I hear the word dog. But she said when she thinks of the word dog, she thinks of a series of pictures of every dog she's ever seen, and that is dog, this conglomeration of all these pictures. And when I first heard that, it changed the way I was doing therapy. So I went from having one picture that I was showing the child to I started doing matching activities where I'd have 4 pictures of dogs, and then I'd have, you know, like 4 pictures of dogs, 4 pictures of chairs. And I'd show them a picture, and it would be, let's say, a chair, a different chair. And I'd say, does it go with this group or that group? So that they're helping figuring out, okay, all of these things are the same because, which I feel like that would work really well with those cards you're showing of having a lot of different pictures of the same concept.
Right. Because I think we're just creatures of habit. And so sometimes I do that with reinforcement too. I have older students now, so it's a little different, but I used to have younger students, and you kind of like, I hope you like what I have today because this is what's in my office.
Right.
I mean, some of these students that I've been talking about that are harder, I really like a challenge. So I'm like, oh man, this kid doesn't like anything. Like there's nothing in here that they like. So that's kind of the idea is like, you know, we're using, you know, or I was spending a lot of time on Google Images making pictures to teach language in the way that I knew that it needed to be taught, just like you're talking about generalization, because it's not always out there. And so, you know, I made those just because it was a problem I was facing, and I figured if I was facing it, a bunch of us were.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. We have a lot of people chiming in here. Oh my gosh. Madeline says 40% of her caseload is autism. That's a lot.
Wow.
Yep. New autism classroom. Yes. Yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone on here is saying that they are working with autism in some capacity or another. So yeah, it's pretty prevalent across the board for sure.
It is, definitely.
All right, so we talked about assessment. We've talked about getting your team involved, getting everybody on the process. We've talked about requesting, and we've talked about labeling. So the last thing we want to touch on today before we wrap up with some resources and some giveaways is we're going to talk about those children who are having trouble engaging in leisure or play or some of these less structured activities. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as a parent, what I've really realized, I've always worked on leisure and teaching students directly leisure because I think there's so much communication-wise that happens there and social rules and group behavior and cooperative learning. But as a parent, I've really learned as a quality of life thing that, you know, leisure is so important. I spend all my time going to soccer and taking my daughter to Girl Scouts and piano lessons and all those things. And I really realized that, you know, our students are so deficient, a lot of the students I work with, in leisure skills. And so I really feel like that I need to directly teach those things so that they can, you know, engage in a game when their cousins come over during the holidays or engage in an outdoor activity, even, you know, if it's a modified sports activity or whatever it happens to be. So I personally have always been, you know, incorporating these modified leisure is what I've been calling it, activities into my instruction. And so I'll have an article that's coming out in the ASHA Leader in the School Matters section in September about leisure skills. And that article will be more towards older students. But I have some students that I see at the private clinic. And one of the things that we have been working on last year was modified musical chairs. So I would have the musical chairs going. We put on Moana or whatever happens to be the hot song at the time. And all they needed to do was understand that when the music's on, we walk. And then when the music stops, we sit down. And so no one ever takes a chair away because, right, goes back to, you know, be a giver, not a taker, because it just gets you in trouble to be a taker. So in my mind, the kiddos I'm working with, I was like, okay, this is great. And I would have the paraprofessionals, the assistants there helping me facilitate this group. And what's great about that too is that they like it, the kids seem to enjoy it, and then that activity was taking place when I wasn't present. And I knew it was taking place because we had a daily data sheet and I could check. And then I would get stories back from the staff like, oh yeah, we played that with so-and-so. And they really enjoyed it. And so it's been so great. The new game that we've been working on now is Modified Simon Says. So I have a mixed group of students. And so it's always, how I modify it is always Simon Says. So it's never without Simon. So really it's gross motor imitation. So we're taking it back, but we're adding into that social component. Can you stand with peers? Can you stand and follow a teacher directive? Can you engage in this group activity without any kind of behavioral barriers that you may demonstrate? And I was writing at home on a note to let a parent know that that's kind of what we were working on and how it looked. And so I had a meeting with this parent, and she let me know, like, hey, we just flew for vacation in the summer, and I had read that you guys were playing Modified Simon Says. So we worked on it in the airport, and the kiddo was able to play it with his brother, and it really was a great thing to do to fill the time. And I thought, wow, that's it. That's the collaborative loop. That's us all working together. And so those little gems of information that I get are always so, exciting. And on my website, www.abaspeech.org, I have a section under resources that has some of these modified leisure activities. So I have one for Uno, memory, and the grocery store game, Hangman, which is another one that I modify. And so if you want some examples of how to maybe modify those for your students, check those out.
I love this. I absolutely love that. I feel like leisure gets looked over, but when you look at what the recommendations from ASHA or any of these professional organizations are, they say work on social skills. And what a better way to work on social skills than teach them some game that they can actually participate in. Because a lot of times our students with autism or other social impairments, they get into a social situation and it's like, okay, good luck, go do something social. But if they get into a game that they're already familiar with, you're going to have more success, because then it's like, oh, I know the rules to this. They don't know the rules of social engagements. They can know the rules to Simon Says. So
exactly. And we at the middle school that I work in, we had taught the students modified Uno. So for these students, we just took out all the, reverse, skip, kind of the harder cards. And then we had students that would come down from another school. And so it was a reverse inclusion opportunity. And you're exactly right. It was like, okay, these are new people. I may be a little nervous about that, but not really, because I know this activity and I'm just going to generalize it to these other students in this different environment. And so that goes all back to how can we generalize these skills and make them systematic.
I love this. I love it. All right. Okay, so that's what we have for our 5 tips. We're going to share some resources and we're going to do some giveaways. So stay tuned if you're with us on Facebook Live right now. But let's talk about resources. What are your favorite resources for working with this population?
Yeah, so my favorite resources, if I had go-tos, are the BB Map.
Yes.
Which is available at www.avbpress.com. And I have no affiliation with that. I just love this assessment. It's the best. And then these are the cards that I created, the Action Builder cards. And those are for sale at Different Roads to Learning. They are also for sale on Amazon. And they are also for sale at Autism Communication Resources. And I'm adding new distributors as we go along. That's been new for me. So
that's awesome.
Those are some of my go-to products that I like to have in my arsenal.
Perfect. And will you put the links to those in the comments as well when we finish up our Facebook Live? So you should have access to those if you'll just scroll down through the comments once we are done here. So those are our resources. Let's talk about giveaways. What are you doing for your giveaway today?
So today, Carrie, I have a TPT store called ABA Speech, and on that TPT store, I have webinars that go in more in depth about some of the things we talked about today. So my best-selling webinar is called The Power of Manding, helping students find their voice, and so I will be giving that away free today.
Excellent. And where can people find that if they don't win today?
If they don't win today, it is at my TPT store, which is called ABA Speech by Rose Griffin.
Okay, so go to teacherspayteachers.com and search. There's a search bar at the top. Search for Rose Griffin, and you'll find her store. And that webinar, along with all of your other ones, right, are going to be in there? Yes. Perfect. Okay, so that's our first giveaway today. We're going to do 2. The second one will be 2 free months in my membership program, which is the Speech Therapy Solution. And if you're new to that, that is an exclusive membership area just for speech language pathologists and other professionals. We are answering questions. We are helping you troubleshoot. We give you ideas for therapy. We have a materials library. We have a video library with training videos. And we just got authorized to offer continuing ed through ASHA. So we're now doing ASHA CEUs, and that is starting in September. So if you are watching this today or shortly after, the end of August is when our price goes up to accommodate those new ASHA CEUs. But if you sign up now in the month of August, you're going to lock in the lower rate before the price hike. So if you're on here now and you've been on the fence, go over to speechandlanguagekids.com/join and get in on that lower price, and you'll be able to lock that in and get all of those CEUs without having to pay the higher price on it. So the winner today is going to get 2 free months of that. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask a question. The first 2 people to respond are going to win. The first one will win the webinar on Manding, and the second one will win the 2 free months in the membership. All right, here we go. Facebook Livers. All right, name a leisure activity that you could modify for a child with autism to participate in. So if you've been on here with us a couple minutes, you heard us talking about teaching a child with autism how to modify the rules a little bit so that they can play some social games that they may be encountering in their daily activities. So we want to know an example of those games, and we're going to use those. All right. Amy Deal says Hangman. Love it. That's a perfect one. And Heather Kelly McKay says Uno. All right, Amy Deal, you are getting the webinar. How do you want Amy to contact you, Rose?
She could email me at abaspeech@yahoo.com.
Perfect. All right. And Heather Kelly McKay, I feel like you might already be a member. And if that's the case, we'll just add 2 months onto your current membership. If not, then we can start you off. But either way, just email me at Carrie, Carrie, at speechandlanguagekids.com, and my assistant Kenna will get you all set up with that. Perfect. All right, we had a bunch of people chime in. Thank you so much. Let me get that down. All right, perfect. That is what we have for today. I'm so glad you all could join us today on Eclipse Day 2017. We will be back on next week with another Speechie Show. But Rose, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find more information about you and all that you have to offer?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Carrie. If you are on Facebook, come and visit me at ABA Speech by Rose Griffin. I'm also on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, and I have a website, www.abaspeech.org. And if you sign up for my email list, I have access to that free webinar about VB-MAP evaluation. I also will be doing freebies every single month this school year to make providing systematic language instruction easier.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And don't forget to head over to speechandlanguagekids.com/join and find out all the information about the speech therapy solution. I just looked up our numbers right before I hopped on this call. We have 1,685 members in there already. So join us on the inside. We'll help you out with your tough cases. We'll give you some continuing ed and make your life easier. So head on over to speechandlanguagekids.com/join, and don't forget to check out all of Rose's information as well. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week on The Speechie Show. Bye for now. Thanks for joining us today on The Speechie Show. We hope today's tips have helped you feel a little less stressed and a little more confident about your work. If you're looking for more stress busters and confidence boosters, we'd love to have you join us in the Speech Therapy Solution, where you'll get access to a huge library of premium training videos and another library of print and go therapy materials. You can also get help with your tough cases by joining Carrie on the weekly Q&A calls or by posting in the exclusive Facebook group. Plus, group members can join us for a monthly webinar that can be used for continuing education credit. Head on over to speechandlanguagekids.com/join to check out all the amazing benefits of the Speech Therapy Solution membership. Bye for now.